anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, but more importantly, the reason why we are here today. Brigadier General Strong Vincent, born in 1837 in Waterford, Pennsylvania, a graduate of Harvard as a lawyer, and a hero to everyone. We come here to dedicate this grave once again for his actions that he did 160 years ago on July 2nd, 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg. We have several speakers today, but first I would like to invite Chaplain Lily to come over and give us an opening prayer. Uncover.
This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for this occasion we can celebrate the life of this brave and wonderful man. We ask that you would guide us today, that it would be to his honor. In Jesus' name, amen.
Cover. The reason why we are all here, not only just for Colonel Strong Vincent, but for all those who serve to help protect our country. From John Sell, a captain in the 83rd Pennsylvania, who didn't even have to be in action, but he was a provost. He was in the rear to make sure that stragglers didn't get left behind. What he did when he came into action, a shell came and took his leg off, and he died the next day. We are also here for Colonel John McClain, Colonel Strong Vincent's previous commander, who lost his life the year previous at the Battle of Gaines' Mill. Strong Vincent was in the hospital at the time, and when he found out that the 83rd was without command, as sick as he was, he got a horse to come back to his regiment. He collapsed from that horse when they were on their move. Strong Vincent almost died on his way back to New York City on the steamer that he was on. His wife and his father met him there, and they had the top doctors working on him. He had what they called Chickahominy fever, and if you do not know what that is, that's typhoid and malaria combination. Now to make you laugh just a little bit, I have been told by previous people that I could not portray Strong Vincent because I'm not big and barrel-chested. Well, Strong Vincent's wife wrote a letter to her old schoolmarm that she used to teach with and said Strong is a skeleton of himself. I am post-Chickahominy fever. All right, we are also here for, if I had my eyes I could see a little better, Jacob Schmall. We have an ancestor over here. He helped to carry Strong Vincent's body from when he was wounded. And he is buried here in the Erie Cemetery. Captain John Sell, as I previously mentioned, he is buried here in the Erie Cemetery. He was brought back to Erie from Strong Vincent's father, Bethuel Boyd Vincent, who is over here, when he was looking for his son in the numerous hospitals that were around. He saw the name of Captain Sell on the list, and he had Captain Sell's body prepared and returned to Erie. I would like to welcome Doug Cook from the 83rd Pennsylvania and a representative of the GAR post. The GAR, the Sons of Union Veterans, I should say. We would be GAR ourselves, but we have a Sons of Union Veterans representative.
In 1886, Union veterans of the Civil War organized a Grand Army of the Republic, GAR, which was a veterans group that became a powerful social and political force for decades to come. As its members aged, concern shifted to how their sons might carry on their work. And in 1881, a group known as the Sons of the Union Veterans of the Civil War was formed. Membership was, and is still today, open to any man able to prove his ancestry to a GAR member or Civil War Union veteran. The group was officially chartered by Congress in 1954 as a patriotic heritage organization. As a civilian patriotic education society, it remains the duty and privilege of the Sons of the Civil War to ensure the sacrifices of these men will never be forgotten. Today, we honor the memory of the soldiers of Colonel Strong Vincent's 83rd Pennsylvania Regiment, buried here in Erie Cemetery. Captain Thomas Austin, Corporal William Cook, Private John Easterly, Lieutenant Samuel Flute, Captain Martin Gifford, Captain John Graham, Private John Hill, Captain James Hunter, Private Warren Jordan, Private Thomas King, Private Patrick Leonard, Private Franklin McKee, Colonel John McLean, Charles Mell, Regimental Band, Private John Miller, Second Lieutenant Edmund Reed, Private James Ross, Private Jacob Small, Regimental Band, Private Paul Snyder, Captain John Sell, Private Jacob Snyder, Private James Starrett, Private Samuel Tate, Private Roland Thompson, First Lieutenant John Vandetta, and Private Jacob Witter.
These are just a few of the men that served under Strong Vincent that are buried just in this cemetery. I come from Corey myself, and we have numerous that fought beside and under Colonel Strong Vincent, including the last colonel of the 83rd Pennsylvania, Chauncey P. Rogers, who was up for promotion to Brigadier General as the hostilities of the Civil War came to an end. We are here to welcome George Deitch, the most smartest guy I know. George, as you may know, is very, very into the Civil War and American history. If you haven't heard him speak before, he not only talked about just the Civil War, but the origins of the war. He has talked about slavery before the war and the origins of that. He is giving a speech this Monday at the Jefferson Society, talking about the boys from Erie County. And you are all welcome to come, but you are to register. I welcome you, George, and thank you for coming.
A little exaggerated on the introduction, but that's okay. And it's nice to see a lot of faces that I know. And thank you all for coming to honor General Vincent and his family that are buried with him. Today I'm going to do something a little different from kind of a standard history talk. I know that Tom is going to talk about his actions on Little Round Top, and so I'm going to, in my research, some of you know that I'm working on a book on the 83rd Pennsylvania. I've come across a whole series of letters, and it's something that has never been published before. I'm not going to read them all. There are literally 80 letters that a man by the name of Oliver Wilcox Norton received as he was preparing his book, The Attack and Defense of Little Round Top, which I'll talk briefly about. There's also, I have just in here, about 60 pages of correspondence between Norton and primarily Strong Vincent's brother, Boyd Vincent, who was a bishop in Cincinnati, Ohio. And they were very close. Norton was the brigade bugler and aide and flag bearer for Strong Vincent at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. He also, stepping back a year, was the first man to sound taps. He helped to create it with General Dan Butterfield, who was the first brigade commander that the 83rd Pennsylvania served under. Norton went on in life to be a champion for Vincent, and Vincent's kind of disappeared from history after he died, and Norton was determined to keep Vincent's name alive for our history. He also, as an aside, he and his brother went into business in the latter part of the 19th century, and they became multi-millionaires when that really meant something. And so he was able to have the resources to move forward in the promotion of Strong Vincent and the memory of his history. Now, believe me, I'm not going to read all of these today, but they're bits and pieces in most of these letters. The first one that just to emphasize what I was saying about Norton, was went back to 1888, and he wrote to the Appleton's Encyclopedia of American Biography, and they were piecing together a new encyclopedia, and Gettysburg, of course, was very prominent in American history at that point, and he realized that there was not very much going on as far as the discussion of even Little Round Top, and especially of Strong Vincent. So he wrote, and this is a 14-pager, I'm going to read one paragraph. I've always felt that General Vincent, by his soldierly comprehension of the situation and the promptness of his action saved our army on the field of Gettysburg that day. And I think sufficient credit has never been given him. Had he hesitated a moment or waited for orders to reach him through ordinary channels, when his brigade arrived on Little Round Top, he would have found it already in possession of the enemy. I think that's a very salient point, and I know that Tom's going to talk about it a little bit more, but barely 10 minutes passed between the time that Vincent brought his troops on the Little Round Top before the onslaught of 2 brigades of the most elite troops in Robert E. Lee's army. But I want to go back just a little bit about Vincent before the Battle of Gettysburg. Tom mentioned that he had Chickahominy fever. He returned to the army in December of 1863 in time for the Battle of Fredericksburg. The 83rd suffered losses comparable to what they lost at Gettysburg that day, but they were not in the meat grinder that had slaughtered so many federal troops that day. However, and that was his first time commanding the regiment because of his previous illness. But during that winter, the early winter of 1864, Vincent would be assigned for about 3 weeks to Adjutant General court-martials. And he did so well at it, he was offered the position of the Judge Advocate General for the Army of the Potomac, which means he would have been the #1 judicial officer for the entire army. He declined that because he felt that his mission was to fight and not to sit in a courtroom. Very interesting part of his character. Second of all, after the second day at Gettysburg was completed, Little Round Top had been held, and Vincent mortally wounded. General Meade, who was the commander of the Army of the Potomac, previously had been commander of the Corps, which Vincent's brigade was part of, wrote a long telegram to Abraham Lincoln telling him about the results of the battle that day. Remember, that's the second day of 3 days of battle. He goes into detail about how the army had held the ground, and he mentions only one man. He mentions Strong Vincent in this telegram, and having been Vincent's previous commander, was well acquainted with him. And he asks President Lincoln, because he knew that Vincent was dying, to promote Vincent to Brigadier General, which Lincoln did. And between the 5 days from his wounding to his death, the orders had been rushed through, and the telegram announcing his promotion was laid on his deathbed not too long before he actually died. So why did Meade think so highly of him? It was just this one battle? No. Vincent had conducted himself before the Battle of Gettysburg in a series of battles in late June, supporting the Federal cavalry against Jeb Stuart in a magnificent fashion. The battles in the Loudoun Valley of Aldie, Middleburg, and Upperville. As a matter of fact, the entire Union cavalry could not break through Jeb Stuart's screen. Their mission was to break through the Confederate cavalry, which was smaller, climb the Blue Ridge Mountain, and look down upon the Shenandoah Valley and figure out where General Lee and his army were at that time. Union cavalry could not do it. They requested support. 5th Corps was closest, and General Meade assigned Strong Vincent and his brigade to do it. Twice, Vincent, through using brilliant infantry tactics, flanked the Confederate cavalry and forced them out of strong position. This, I truly believe, was the action that General Meade referred to as far as saying in that telegram that he was going to recommend Vincent for a star if he had survived the battle. So, again, something about Vincent that not a lot of people know about, but those actions in the Loudoun Valley spoke of his absolute superb tactical handling of troops. And especially when you look at it, he was not a West Pointer, he was a Harvard lawyer, he was a civilian who joined and volunteered. Now, to the best of my knowledge, the letters that I'm going to refer to you here have never been published. As a matter of fact, the correspondence between Strong Vincent and his wife Elizabeth, who is buried here, has never been found. As a matter of fact, I believe that the letters were probably destroyed either by Elizabeth or by his brother Boyd. I've searched for them. Other researchers, serious researchers about Vincent, at least 3 others that I personally know of over the years, have searched for this correspondence. There are only a couple of letters that have appeared. So I don't have any letters from Strong to Lizzie or back that I can read to you today. But what I do have are a series of letters from Oliver Norton to Bishop Vincent that went across a 20-year period and have, I think, shows great insight and a great deal about the closeness that the Vincents had with Oliver Norton. And I got these from the Pagan History Center's archives. I knew they were there, pulled them out specifically for this. And they are copies of a manuscript collection that is at the Central Michigan University. And it's of Norton's, a couple scrapbooks of Norton's. And I don't know why other researchers haven't stumbled across these, but they haven't. So you're going to hear a few excerpts today on some things that have never truly been published. Correspondence between Just Norton and Bishop Vincent, which is over 50 pages. And the ones that I'm going to be talking about today go from 1910 to 1916. A substantial portion of the correspondence is addressed to the bishop and to Mrs. Vincent, the colonel's widow, who I just mentioned earlier. These letters provide insight into the life and the character of Norton and Vincent, his considerable devotion to the Vincents, his disappointment with his publisher. I won't get into that part. And briefly, you mentioned at one point his apparent estrangement from his own son. There are 80 other letters in the collection to other participants at Little Round Top. What Norton did for the first time is put together a comprehensive history of what happened on Little Round Top. There were multiple books, Comte de Paris, Swinton, Doubleday, and others, but they never got it quite right. They gave different people different credit for things that didn't happen the way they did. So Norton was determined to set it right, and from the late 1800s all the way up to the 1910 region, he wrote a series of letters to participants, other generals, sergeants, you name it, that he could identify that would have some insight on what happened at Gettysburg. And he put together what, at that time, was clearly the most important work on the battle at Little Round Top. But I'll start here with a letter to Bishop Vincent from Norton. And he talks about a number of things. The part here I want to read is, please say to Mrs. Vincent that we regret the necessary delay of her proposed visit, but we'll be glad to see her whenever she's able to come. By this time, Elizabeth had health had started to fail, and you can see in the coming notes that Norton was constantly solicitous of the bishop and of Mrs. Vincent about her health. A letter a couple months later, I'm pleased to hear that Mrs. Vincent is making some progress in her recovery, but it's plain that she is far from well. And this is the funny part. This is why I picked this. I feel very, very sorry for her. I wish you could have a dog, but I think you are right to postpone it at present. I hope she may have some glasses, which will, in a measure, at least correct the uncertainty of her vision, and that she will have these on before she tries to chase a dog. He goes on to complain about the publication of his book. Neil Publications was slow walking it, and he was continually frustrated. And that thread runs through several of these letters. You might know that Strong Vincent's sword, his dress sword, is at the Smithsonian. The sword he carried at Little Round Top, which remained strapped to his horse, is in the collection of the Pagan History Center if you want to see it. But a number of years back, we tried to get the dress sword here, and the Smithsonian clung onto it. They even had, at that time, Congressman Phil English try to intercede, and they consider this one of their most prized possessions. So they've never given it up. Here in 1912, he's saying, I wish to ask your advice about the disposition of Strong Vincent's sword. I do not like to keep it. Mrs. Vincent had given it to Norton. I don't want to keep it much longer myself, and I don't think it ought to go to any of my family. Mrs. Vincent spoke to me before she sent it to me about the advisability of sending it to the stately house in Harrisburg. I advised her not to do so. This is where the Capitol is, and they had a museum there, including the Civil War swords. He goes on to say, that building is a den of thieves. I've always been sorry that I permitted her to leave it to my son, who proved unworthy of it, but although his name was put on it, there was a little plaque on the scabbard. The sword has never left my possession. He has renounced all desire to have it, and even talked of changing his name, which was Strong Vincent Norton. The plate could easily be removed and another one substituted. I appreciate the delicacy of this situation. Mrs. Vincent's present state of health, I do not feel like writing her about it. I do not want you to know about it. And then he goes on to suggest that it goes to the Smithsonian, which it ultimately did. He changed the nameplate as a gift from Mrs. Vincent to the Smithsonian. I am only anxious that the sword should be placed where it'll have a better opportunity to bring Strong Vincent's name and deeds before the people in a better way than it ever can if it is kept in a private house. So those of you that have heard the story about the sword, you'll know that there's some of the background. Now, from Bishop Vincent, and he talks about Norton's book. I find it hard to speak with restraint of my admiration and gratitude for what you have done in it, as a matter of historical justice and the culmination of a lifelong personal loyalty to Strong Vincent. I think, too, that you can very confidently await the estimates of competent authorities on its merits as a military record and its value in substantiating its principal claim, which was that Vincent was key to holding Little Round Top. And he says, and the bishop goes on, I don't see how with the actual facts in your command you could have done any less than expose Barnes and Welsh as you have done. Two names that came up. Barnes was the division commander. He should have been where Vincent was when Vincent was approached by the aide that ultimately Vincent chose on his own responsibility to move to Little Round Top. Barnes was not there. there's all kinds of excuses you find throughout history books about Barnes. My view, and I think Norton's strong view, although he did not put it explicitly in the book, was that Barnes was drunk that day. The commander of the division that led the 5th Corps onto the field was nowhere to be found. That's what put Vincent in the position to take his fateful decision, which Tom will talk about some more. Welsh, commander of the 16th Michigan. The 16th Michigan broke that day. The right 3 companies, the Colonel Welsh, and the flag bearer all fled under pressure of the Confederate attack on the far right-hand side of Vincent's line. The bishop says Welsh makes a pretty poor showing too in his report. The fact that he flunked his duty and Vincent, who otherwise may have lived, died trying to do it for him. But he goes on, because Welsh would later end up leading a charge at Petersburg, which cost him his life. So the bishop says, I'm thankful Welsh had a later chance to redeem himself, and it did. And then, as to your main point, justice has not been done, etc. I mentioned that casually the other day to Major General Brooke in St. Augustine. On the contrary, he said, all of his competent compatriots at the time and since appreciated what Strong Vincent did there. So you can see that there's a whole series of correspondence between these men, and there's many more, but I'm going to kind of close that part there. That really attempted to put Vincent back to where he should have been in history. There's some letters toward the end which I don't want to take any more time about, but of the further illness and death of Lizzie Vincent, she actually left Norton $250 in her will for cigars, and because Norton loves cigars. The press got a hold of it, and there were some negative comments, and Norton was furious at it. But he also said, obviously, he was a multimillionaire, he didn't need somebody else buying cigars. So he wrote back to the bishop, who was helping to sponsor a colored church in Cincinnati. And Norton chose to take the money from Lizzie and donate it to help support the brand new church for the blacks living in Cincinnati. The bishop went on, lived to almost 90 years. When he was about 85, he came to Erie to be one of the principal people dedicating the brand new Strong Vincent High School. He also gave a mass at St. Paul's Church, which had been the home church for the Vincents, and he gave a talk about Vincent at Gettysburg, and interesting correspondence on that. I do not have a copy of Vincent's actual dedication speech about his brother. However, he had been given a speech to the various veteran commanderies around the Midwest, talking about Vincent and Little Round Top. And I believe it's the same speech that he gave here. What's interesting is there's a letter from Norton who, point by point, went through an early version of Bishop Vincent's talk about his brother and made about 10 different corrections. So you can see that they were very close and had some very interesting continuing for 50 years after the war correspondence. And I'm not going to get into this next one, but I will mention that some of you who follow Gettysburg know that Joshua Chamberlain gets the lion's share of credit for Little Round Top, which quite frankly, he played a heroic role, but he was Vincent's subordinate, and he did what Vincent told him to do. The later he got on in life, the more Chamberlain seemed to take credit. And even his good friend and later colonel of the same regiment, Ellis Spear, began to dispute some of Chamberlain's later writings and speeches. And there's a whole section of letters between Norton and Bishop Vincent. Initially, Norton tends to side with Chamberlain, but as it goes on and on and on, especially with the publication of Chamberlain's last book, by that time, Norton is completely fed up with Chamberlain, and basically says, in so many words, he's hogging all the credit, and had gone from not being real close to Spear to actually strong correspondence with Spear toward the end. So history turns interestingly as it goes on. But I just thought today I would give you just a little insight from these papers, which again, none of these have ever been published, and just kind of my point of view on some of the background and some of the ways that history flows, and how these families stayed close for decades after the war. So I've probably taken too long, but I appreciate your attention, and I'll turn it back to Tom.
Thank you, George. I'm writing in. We are ordered to come in and help out the Union line. The 5th Corps has been called into action. The 3rd Corps has moved forward and separated from the rest of the Army. They need troops to fill it in. Meanwhile, we know that Gouverneur Warren, the chief engineer of the Army, was sent to Little Round Top. The only thing that was up there was Signal Corps, and they were getting ready to pack up as there was no action there. Well, Gouverneur Warren mounts a rock. He looks to the south. He sees a glint of steel over a mile away. He orders a battery down in Devil's Den, Smith's battery, to send a single shot in that direction. He sees the glint of steel moving, and he knows that the rebel army is flanking the Union army. He knows that the only troops on this hill are carrying flags. He orders the Signal Corps to act accordingly and stay. Keep sending signals. Make it look like the hill is occupied until he can get some troops to reinforce the hill. He sends aides out. And one of these aides happens to come upon Sedgwick. I'm sorry, not Sedgwick. Sorry. But General Barnes is ordered to send a brigade to that hill. The aides all go out in different directions looking for Barnes. As George said, Barnes was nowhere to be found. Vincent happens to see one of these aides, beckons him over. What are your orders? I'm looking for General Barnes. What are your orders? Give me your orders. General Sykes needs General Barnes to put a brigade up on that hill up yonder. The rebels are flanking us. I'll take the responsibility. You find General Barnes and tell him I'm going to take that hill. I turned to Colonel Rice, my second in command, who is also the commander of the 44th New York. Bring the boys up as fast as you can. Double quick when you can. I'm going to go up ahead to best see where we can place the regiments. As we get towards the front face of what we know as Little Round Top, shells start coming our direction. I turn. Norton is there with the flag unfurled. Damn it, Norton! Down with the colors and behind the rocks with it! We dismount and we hit briefly. The shelling slackened. I left my sword behind on the horse. Old Jim. It was too rough and I had too much time, not enough time that is, to look over the grounds. Just then, the first elements of my brigade arrived. The 44th New York in the lead, followed by the 16th Michigan, then the 83rd, and then the 20th Maine. As I place them in position, Rice comes to me and says, "We have always fought beside the 83rd and we wish to continue it." The 83rd and the 44th were also known as Butterfield's twins, and they did like to fight beside each other. I agreed. The 44th stood by and let the 16th Michigan take my right flank. 44th falls in beside them, then the 83rd, and then to the 20th Maine, the extreme left flank of the whole army. I go to each commander and tell them they must hold this ground at all hazards, that they must not yield. If the rebels take this hill, we're going to be in a world of trouble, and the rebels may win the day once again. Once I did this, the boys dug in as fast as they could. I positioned myself in the center of my brigade to better observe and see where I could put my reserves and send them in. The first elements of the rebel army come in. You can hear the hooting and hollering. You can see the scraggly uniforms. Texas soldiers are coming at us. They first start and attack the 16th and the 83rd. They're fought back and pushed back. They start to push more to my left. More elements of the Confederate Army are coming in from Alabama. And they start feeling around to my left to find the best way to get into my lines. After one of these attacks, some of the soldiers from the 16th Michigan start to fall back. I am not happy with this. I gave the orders, they should be followed. So I run to the front, climbing up rocks. I come across Sergeant Sprague of the 44th New York, which I knew. He's yelling at them deliriously, holding his shoulder and his pants up with his wounded arm that he has, telling them to get back in line, boys, get back. I tell him, I've got this. You take care of yourself. I rush to the front. I see the cacophony of danger going on. The screams, the bullets, the smoke. You hear the moans. You hear the bullets bouncing off rocks. I know I must be seen. And with only my wife's riding crop in my hand, I find the biggest and nearest rock. Climb that rock. Don't give an inch, boys! Don't give an inch! And as I do this, a bullet slams through my left leg, into my right, into the groin area. It shatters both legs, severs the artery. I am taken to my initial spot where I had my flag. Then eventually I'm taken to the Weichert farm, but when shelling and such deemed it unsafe there, I was then taken to the Bushman farm, where I spent the rest of my days. I didn't know if my line held or not. I was in a heap of trouble if it didn't, because I did not follow proper military protocol. I needed to receive the orders from my division commander, not a captain that's riding on a horse. I deemed it necessary to take action as I needed it done. As I lay in the bed that evening, it's dark. You can hear the moans and you can see the age running by. A lone soldier walks into the room. It is Norton. Norton is in shock. He got permission to come to the hospital to see me and to find out how I was doing. I'm very weak, but I was cleaned up and I'm lying as comfortably as I can in bed. He sees the look on my face. I can't barely speak. They held, Colonel. They're still there. They held for you. A smile comes across my face. Norton can barely control himself. He takes a deep breath, gives a salute, and walks out the room. That is the last time I saw my dear friend Norton. The next day, July 3rd, I have a little bit more energy after a night's rest, but not much. The Chief of Staff of the whole Army, my former brigade commander, Dan Butterfield, comes in. General Meade knows what you did. Your orders have been sent to Washington. You are going to be a general. I'm very pleased. And I look to him and say, weekly, I would like to go home and recover so I can get back to the boys as soon as I can. Butterfield goes out and sends messages out. And he goes and sees the surgeon. The surgeon comes and tells him he can't be moved. Butterfield comes back into the room to see me and says, the surgeon says you cannot be moved. Well, I guess I fought my last battle. Would you send for my wife? I would wish her to be here with me on my last days. Butterfield sent a message out to Erie. Unfortunately, my wife cannot come. She is 7 months pregnant with our first child. So, my father, Bethuel Boyd, BB, as he was affectionately known by his friends, he takes the first train he can to Gettysburg. Meanwhile, days pass. It's becoming close to when it's my time. On the early morning of July 7th, 1863, the last words, feebly spoken by now Brigadier General Strong Vincent, were the Lord's Prayer. My name is Tom Hansen. I am Strong Vincent's graveside speaker and official portrayer. I do this in remembrance of our honored general here. As George stated earlier, everybody knows who Chamberlain is because of the movie. Everybody knows who Chamberlain is because of the books he wrote. Those that win the battles and those that live write the history. Strong Vincent didn't get to write his history. And we thank God for his bugler and dear friend, Norton, for doing the right thing and honoring his dear friend. The house that Strong Vincent was taken to, the Bushman farm, they were so touched by Strong Vincent that they named their first child Strong Vincent Bushman. And he is buried in the Gettysburg Cemetery after a long life. Now I mentioned that the baby of Strong Vincent, right here, Blanche, not long before her first birthday, she was laid in the same grave as her father. She did not survive the year, just missing it by 10 days. Elizabeth led a long life with Boyd. She helped take care of Ward. She had a long life, and she loved her Strong so much that she dedicated her life to always honoring him and making sure people knew him. I want you to know, I have little tokens over here for you. As you can see, they're flying off the table. They are for your vehicles or windows or wherever. This is the brigade flag of Colonel Strong Vincent. Not many know this. This same flag flew at the surrender at Appomattox. When the Confederate Army surrendered the one to receive him to surrender was Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, and he had this brigade flag with him. It wasn't Chamberlain's brigade. It was Vincent's brigade. Now I ask, ma'am, would you come here, please? In honor of all the mothers and wives who lost their loved one during the Civil War. They lost sons, they lost brothers. I would ask you to represent Elizabeth and lay the flower on his grave. Now I would ask Reverend Lilly to come in and rededicate the grave. Brigadier General Strong Vincent. Uncover.
Let us pray. Father, we thank you for the brave man who gave all in the war between the states. Thank you for those who were brave that we can remember. Thank you for the dear memories of Brigadier Strong Vincent. We dedicate this space one more time to his honor and his memory. We ask that you would guide us in that same vein of action. We ask you to bless this day. In Jesus' name.
Lieutenant?
Sir, no. Don't you dare get in front of that gun. It'll kill you. That's your ears. Please move back. Move back. Press. Prepare. Fire!
Uncover! Ready? Cover. I wish to thank you for coming here this afternoon. I hope you all leave with a special thought in your hearts, and not just for Strong Vincent, but for all those who are buried in this cemetery and cemeteries throughout the land. Some aren't lucky enough to have a name on their headstone. 2 weeks ago, I was in Gettysburg. You should have seen all the unknowns. They never got to go home to their families. There are soldiers still buried on fields throughout the United States and throughout this world that have American soldiers in them that we know nothing about. Please remember them. Don't let history be erased. Thank you.
Turn it over to